Final Fantasy Mystic Quest is an entry-level RPG released for the Super Nintendo in 1992. Reviews were mixed to positive upon release, but the game has developed a bit of a negative reputation by hardcore RPG fans over the years. I myself have never played an RPG before, as the thought of a 40-hour adventure featuring game mechanics I'm not completely familiar with has never seemed appealing. On the flip side, playing through a 10-hour adventure with a game aimed at my skill level, well, that's a whole different story. The first thing that stands out to me is the main overworld. You can't freely walk around. Instead, you are on a rigid path, much like Super Mario World, but without the lines connecting the locations. As you progress through the game, new areas become available and the story moves along. Final Fantasy Mystic Quest never allows you to access areas out of order. Experienced folks might find this limiting, but this doesn't really bother me, as one of my biggest pet peeves with games is getting lost and not understanding where to go next. Throughout the entire game, I consulted a guide just twice, so it works. The weapon system is equally basic, and there are just 4 different weapon types that you can wield: the sword, the axe, the bombs, and a claw. These can each be upgraded a total of 3 times. While I'm not familiar with RPGs, I do enjoy the 2D Zelda games, which are typically classified as action RPGs. Mystic Quest does include some action RPG elements. Each of the 4 weapons have a use outside of battle. The sword can be used to trigger switches, the axe can chop down trees and mushrooms, the bombs can open doors, and the claw can be used to climb walls. A later upgrade to the claw turns it into a grappling hook, allowing you to get over large pits. In addition to these weapons, you can also jump, allowing you to get over regular-sized pits. The levels and dungeons themselves are often maze-like and force you to use the newly acquired items to progress. Early on, you must use your bombs to open the mouths of these skeletons. The game doesn't tell you to do this, you just have to figure it out. Same goes for the sword. The game tells you can use your sword to flip switches. Later on in the game, you must use the sword to switch open these tree faces. Most of the levels also feature a lot of different vertical layers, with a number on the bottom right letting you know exactly where you are. The ice pyramid has you traversing all the way to the top, then dropping down the center to get to the boss. It all reminded me a lot of Zelda games, which is something I enjoy quite a bit. Turn-based combat is something I'm less than familiar with. Having played some Dungeons & Dragons in my teenage years, I understand turn-based combat, leveling up, initiative, criticals, etc. But the thought of navigating through text menus to perform just a single action in a video game, and then waiting my turn to do it all again, seemed boring. After playing through Final Fantasy Mystic Quest, my mind hasn't completely changed. Turn-based combat by its very nature is slow and different. I can say, after playing through the game, I'm a lot less intimidated by it. As this is a simpler RPG, there are a lot fewer weapons, a lot less spells, and therefore figuring out a strategy during combat is rather easy. In addition to the 4 weapons mentioned earlier, you have a total of 12 spells you can learn. 8 of these are attacking spells and 4 are of the healing variety. As the game progresses, you'll find new spells in chests, and this pretty much foreshadows the best weapons and spells to use in the next area. Most things in Aquaria are weak to your fire spell. Most things in Fireburg are weak to your blizzard spell. And finally, most things in Windia are weak to your arrow spell. Also simplifying things is the fact there are at most just 2 people in your party at any given time. The person in your party usually has a limited amount of spells or none at all, and just a single weapon they can fight with. At the beginning of the game, I left my partner in auto mode and let the computer figure out their actions. However, about halfway through the game, I started understanding the flow of everything, and I took over all of the decision making. The final element of RPGs that always scared me off was random encounters with enemies. What if I just depleted all of my resources on the last battle, then I wasn't ready for another battle? I don't want to see a game over screen based on random chance. Whether these fears are justified or not is a moot point here. There are no random encounters in Final Fantasy Mystic Quest. In the overworld, you can choose to battle creatures using these battlefields. The battlefields have 10 rounds and you can play through them one at a time. At the beginning of the game, I did a lot of grinding and cleared all of these battlefields out, hoping to level up and be as beefy as possible. As the game progressed, I ignored more and more of them. In the actual levels, all of the enemy encounters are clearly marked. This is where I think a lot of hardcore players get turned off by Final Fantasy Mystic Quest. It holds your hand through a lot of the adventure, and it isn't terribly difficult. By the time I got to the final section of the game, I was breezing through the enemies and bosses without any real challenge. Thankfully, the levels themselves still offer plenty of maze-like construction and light puzzle elements that kept me engaged. Most of the later stages are absolutely huge, requiring 60 to 90 minutes to get through, and I never felt bored either. Time simply melted away. The story in Final Fantasy Mystic Quest is pretty basic. Recover 4 crystals scattered in the 4 sections of the game: Foresta, Aquaria, Fireburg, and Windia. After collecting each crystal, that area of the world returns to normal. So, Foresta turns back to green, Aquaria thaws out, and so on. There is no deep story here, no character development, no plot twists, nothing. The characters are mostly forgettable, and at the end of the game when everyone was bidding me farewell, I couldn't tell you who any of them were or what they did during the adventure. At the end of the day, I actually enjoy Final Fantasy Mystic Quest. It took me about 15 hours to finish, which is significantly longer than most games I play. Still, it held my attention till the very end. The different levels and their construction reminded me of a Zelda game, and the turn-based combat wasn't too overwhelming nor complex. There was enough variety in the locations to keep me going, and I enjoyed trying to figure out the different weaknesses of new enemies and bosses. The decent graphics and solid soundtrack are the glue that hold it all together. I mentioned at the beginning of this review that hardcore fans of the genre like to hate on this game, but I'm willing to bet there are a ton of you out there that enjoy this game. And you should, because Final Fantasy Mystic Quest is a good game. 3 out of 5.